Politicians in their 80s retire to write their memoirs. Not so Ian Paisley. In a moment, we find out more about the big man.
O God, grant to thy servants of the intelligence corps.
In a new series, BBC Radio 4 investigates the role of padres in the British Armed Forces.
In a situation of violence, then there's a need for somebody to be an agent of the presence of God.
It points up very clearly the whole ambiguity of the chaplain's position. You know, one is part of an organisation which kills people.
God and the gun.
I am a priest, not a soldier. I can't fight. All I can do is pray for the guys.
Begins tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock.
Ian Paisley's political career has spanned the lives of 11 American presidents. During that time, he's never been far away from controversy. He set up his own church and political party and seen off all his foes. Now, Reverend Paisley is facing his most important decision yet, whether to share power with his political enemies. Kevin Connolly talks to family, friends and critics to discover the different voices of the big man.
We're singing another well-known gospel hymn.
I can't remember when I hadn't heard of Ian Paisley.
115.
A giant personality that has to be dealt with.
Would you be free from your burden of sin?
He's the eternal optimist, never gives up.
There's power in the blood. Power in the blood.
He is a bully, it's part of his shtick.
Would you, o'er evil, a victory win? There's wonderful power in the blood.
I came to the task of profiling Ian Paisley with a little trepidation.
Stand to worship.
Not least because he hasn't much time for reporters. He joked once that our role in obscuring the truth could be summed up in the line from Luke's Gospel, describing Christ surrounded by a crowd. They could not see Jesus for the press. That public Paisley, scorching of voice and sharp of tongue, is not hard to uncover and understand. But if there was to be a way into the private figure behind those public masks, it was perhaps through the family of 5 children that he and his wife Eileen raised quietly through all the years of public turbulence. His son Kyle followed him into the ministry.
That photograph there was given to me about 3 years ago, and it's a picture of Mum and Dad, my sister, youngest sister Cherith. That's me there on his left hand and Ian on his right hand. Well, when I was young, I liked to go with my dad everywhere, so there's always usually like a band parade or some kind of a rally on a Friday or Saturday in the middle of the summer. Saturday was a day for opening churches, so we'd usually travel. Just like travelling with them, you know, just like being there.
Well, was it easy to be a close family when your dad was such a public figure?
And we always used to, if we were together at home before we went out in the morning, he always used to have reading and prayer with us, and we'd pray around, which helped us immensely. That was good. We were never buttonhole into making any decisions about faith or our religion, but we were shown it, let me put it like this, right from wrong, you know.
As a preacher, of course, Ian Paisley deals in the Bible's iron certainty of eternal justice, so I wanted to know what sort of dad that made him. I asked Kyle's twin, Ian Jr., a politician in his dad's political movement, the Democratic Unionist Party.
I don't ever remember him being really angry with us, you know, and we did some terrible things, I know that. I mean, I remember once we'd found cigarette butts, and I'd brought them to church, and during the service I handed one to my brother, and you can imagine in the second row of a packed church, a couple of thousand people sitting there, the two of us with the cigarette butts, pretending to puff on them whilst my father was preaching. Whenever my mother saw this, they were soon whipped from our hands, and we were told that whenever we got home from church that day it would be sorted out. Dad usually saw the funny side of these things, you know, and I must say now as a parent, whenever I see my own kids getting up to all of these things, I admire their sense of restraint.
The IRA have worldwide backing for their acts of terrorism and their attempt to wipe out the Protestants of Ulster. And that is the real aim of their campaign. They are purely sectarian.
It always seems that Ian Paisley is most at home on the political stage, denouncing the enemies of Ulster. But he was a touring preacher first, bringing showmanship to the business of denouncing the Pope and all his works.
Everybody knows that the Protestants are being driven out.
The writer and left-wing politician Eamon McCann remembers seeing him perform.
He was a very funny man on stage at times. A gang of us used to go almost every Sunday night for the entertainment value. But I must say, sort of at that time, it didn't occur to us that Dr. Paisley was going to become the leader of Northern Protestantism stroke unionism. He seemed like a throwback to the past rather than a harbinger of what was going to happen in the future. And additionally, Paisley's followers seemed to be very old, even in the late 50s, early 60s, and overwhelmingly women. A lot of old women loved the Reverend Paisley, and I remember in the City Hall watching him with his veins and his bulging sort of, and that, you know, extremely charismatic, masculine approach, and these glassy-eyed old ladies yelping with pleasure at Paisley's denunciations of the Pope, and I thought to myself, there's a lot going on there.
One remembers Paisley in the early years as being always shouting, always looking as though he was just on the verge of losing control, and not appearing to be a person that you would want to associate with. My perspective of Paisley is of a stormy petrel in those days, who then got his opportunity responding to what appeared to be a resurgent republicanism in 1966, not always responding to it in a way that one approved of.
David Trimble's one of a string of leaders of the main Protestant party that Ian Paisley didn't approve of. Official unionism was the party of the big house, the landowning class. Ian Paisley was a new phenomenon, a leader for Protestants who lived in small houses. The writer and broadcaster Fionnuala O'Connor.
He gradually became the loudest voice, the most distinctive voice, and the most unsettling voice of Protestant fundamentalism and disgruntled and worried unionist politics. People who saw reform coming and didn't like it. So he did from a very early stage unite the two, and that's what Paisleyism meant. It meant not an inch religious fundamentalism, and it meant not an inch unionist politics, and that was Paisley's power, and it gave him his status.
If this is the way that O'Neill wants to play it, we declare our intention from this platform that we will organise massive demonstrations continually.
Terence O'Neill was Northern Ireland's Prime Minister in the mid-60s, a softly spoken old Etonian who wanted ruling Protestants to reach out to the Catholic minority. He had no answer to the furious street politics of Paisleyism.
Right.
That's great, Dr. Paisley. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
When I met Ian Paisley for this programme, I found myself searching instinctively for signs of that familiar fury, and finding none. The old, massive physical presence isn't quite what it was, but the charisma which commands the room is undimmed. He was resplendent in a party rosette, one of those old-time politicians who draws a kind of life force from the electricity of campaigning. The short, business-like interview we'd been granted began to stretch and grow more reflective as we ranged over his 56 years in public life, including a period in prison for a public order offence. The tone was genial, almost avuncular, even as he recalled the lengths to which he said O'Neill had been prepared to go to shut him up.
When I was in prison, the prison doctor came to me and he said to me, Terence O'Neill wants you to be certified. And I said, you're joking? No, I said, I'm not joking, this is very serious, Ian. He says, I have been called in, and he says, we've got to certify you. It's the only way we can get rid of you. Well, I said, that's all right. Are you going to do it? Well, he said, you are as sound a man in your ways as anybody. Nobody believes you need to be certified. So they would have done that on me. Well, that really steeled me. I said, well, if they're prepared to do that with me, who's caused them very little complaints, what would they not do if I was really their enemy? They would kill me.
So the Ian Paisley I met this time around wasn't the one I'd studied in hours of archive film. But the contradictions have always been there. Consider the gulf between the anger with which he denounces his enemies and the humility with which he speaks of his religious belief.
I pray about everything, even the smallest things I pray about, because that's what the Scripture tells me. Take it to the Lord in prayer. And I I don't believe that I have to go into a room and shut the door and kneel down and put all the lights off and think. I pray as I go. So it becomes natural. It's like breath. And I mean, I wouldn't do anything, even simple things, without asking the Lord's help and the Lord's grace.
Does your faith, your certainty ever waver at all?
No, not in the sense of doubting God. I doubt myself. I doubt my own frailty and my own foolishness and my own sinfulness, but I don't doubt God.
Do you pray for your enemies?
I do. I certainly do. Pray for my enemies.
McGuinness, Adams...
Yeah, I pray for everyone I know, that they may be guided into the good paths of righteousness and peace. I have no wish for any man to go to hell, where I deserve to go, but Christ in his mercy has saved me.
We live in godless times, and there's something rather disarming about a politician who speaks so simply about the importance of faith in his life. Ian Jr.
I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand. They think that he uses religion as a vehicle. But Ian Paisley's relationship with his Lord is to him the essence of his life.
But dealing in the changeless, non-negotiable certainties of the Bible makes Ian Paisley a hard politician for others to deal with. Eamon McCann.
This is a man who has always identified the cause of Protestantism with the cause of Ulster, and therefore to give an inch to nationalists in politics was almost to go against God.
But also you're guided by God and informed by the Bible, so you don't have to equivocate or compromise because you have the revealed truth to guide you, and politics isn't like that. I mean, is he more comfortable as a religious figure, do you think, than a politician?
I think Paisley is more comfortable as a religious figure, and it's interesting that when he's put under pressure at times, he resorts more or less automatically, instinctively, to biblical references. It will come naturally to Paisley to say that the IRA must wear sackcloth and ashes. What other political leaders would say that when what they mean is that they want their political enemy or their rival to back off?
Not all Protestants, of course, are comfortable with this 16th century version of the old-time religion, where the Pope is the Antichrist and the Catholic Church the harlot of Babylon. So this is a sermon preached at Martyrs Memorial. I went to see the retired Methodist minister Dennis Cook, who's collected a cassette library of Paisley's sermons to expose the theological errors within.
We think of all the things that are being said about the Roman Antichrist.
It was hard to imagine, as we spooled through a Paisley sermon on the election of Pope Benedict, that Dennis's gentle-voiced criticisms would ever dent the powerful certainty of Paisley's belief.
Oh God, save us from popery, save this land from darkness and the shadow of death, and bring them to the light of the gospel.
But he prays for Roman Catholics to be delivered from the error of their ways. I mean, when he talks about smashing his enemies, well, the enemy there is the IRA, is it not?
To him, the IRA are the armed wing of the Roman Catholic Church. That's what he's on record as having said. He is being insulting to Roman Catholics. He is saying that they're not a Christian church, and they were responsible for fomenting revolution in Northern Ireland. He puts down the Northern Ireland troubles to popery. He sees the struggle of the last 30 or 50 years as the struggle between truth and error, between popery and Protestantism. So his politics and his Christianity are mixed up in a very, I would suggest, distorted manner.
I think some people have the idea that every Sunday he's hammering tongs at the Pope, Sunday morning and Sunday evening. But in fact, it's not really like that. It's just on particular occasions,
But can you understand why people outside the church and the party find him intimidating?
I met a group of children from a school in, I think it was in West Ireland, and we talked very frankly and openly. And one girl asked a question. She said, "Can you understand how we sometimes feel threatened by your father?" And I suppose in a way you could, because if from an early day you have been taught to put your trust in a particular system of thought or system of religion, and then somebody comes along who's quite openly states the very opposite and states it very boldly, you would feel as though the rug was being taken under your feet. But I can't understand why people would think of him personally as biased or bigoted. But I can understand why people feel threatened by the strident way in which he puts his view across.
Ah yes, that voice.
You couldn't ignore him.
The actor Chris Barry provided the voice of Ian Paisley for Spitting Image.
All other Irish politicians, Northern Irish politicians, Jerry Fitt, there was John Hume around at the time, Brian Faulkner, people like that, you know, but I couldn't really tell you how they spoke.
If people rang up the house, would it usually put it on the voice sometimes when we were kids?
A friend phoned him one Sunday, and I got on the phone and answered and knew who it was right away. And then after 3 or 4 minutes I let him know it's not me, it's just Kyle. So I handed over to my brother did the same thing.
Which would cause great consternation to my father, because he would then have to try and explain that he was the real Ian Paisley. After he had been spoken to, and after others had spoken on the phone about him.
My father was a Belfast man, and he sent me to the same school in Belfast.
Chris Barry.
And one of our teachers used to get up there and do an amazing impersonation, and he used to do Paisley in various modes. He used to do the... There will be no surrender. This country, the British government had better get its head around the situation in Northern Ireland fast. And then he would come down and sort of do the, there will be untold bloodshed. He would do this whistle that Paisley had in his voice. And he was to take him to all different levels. So when I went on to Spitting Image, and I remembered what this teacher at school had done.
The lampooning was often crude and cruel, but Ian Paisley has the showman's instinctive understanding of how humour helps you to grip an audience.
I have a sense of humour, and I can laugh at myself as well. It's just one way to reach people. And I mean, when people laugh, they relax, the tension is taken away.
When did you first realise that you had this incredible ability to hold a crowd?
Well, I had an interesting experience. I went to Wales to study in the Barry School of Evangelism, and that was during the war. And I met up with a man who had been the welterweight champion, and he had been converted. He had been a drunkard and a wild-living man. He had been converted. And I used to go out to open-air meetings, which were very widely attended, and he used to preach. But he had never learned to use his voice. So when he had shouted for 10 minutes, he got hoarse. So he used to hit me and say, Ian, you get in there and you talk to these people till I get my breath back. So that's where I learned that I had a certain degree of power in speaking to people. I was thrown in at the deep end. So maybe for 7 minutes I spoke, and then he would come in and hit me and say, get out Ian. And he would go on, do another 10 minutes, and then he would lose his voice again. Then he would put me in again.
And your voice never failed, I take it?
No, it didn't. I have a very good voice, but then I had a very good teacher. I was taught by one of the best speakers in Northern Ireland. And my voice is as strong today at over 80 than it was when I was 16.
We say never! 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 Never!
Somebody said of him once, he was the best orator since Adolf Hitler. But of course he used his ability to different then.
To what end then did Ian Paisley use his undeniable gift for raising issues and rousing crowds? Eamon McCann.
Oh, I think that Paisley certainly sent people out into the streets sort of in a mood of anger, which led to violence, and Paisley would rarely, if ever, take responsibility for the violence which resulted from some of his sermons and political addresses. He's not unique in that, of course, in Irish or any other history, but certainly I think that in any history of the violence in Northern Ireland over this past 35 years, I think that a significant role would have to be ascribed to Ian Paisley.
This is only a small token of many thousands of men who are pledged to me, and I am pledged to them, to stand together at this time of grave trouble in Northern Ireland.
In 1981, Paisley paraded his Third Force, a group of Protestant men with certificates for legally held firearms, who declared themselves ready to resist the IRA. It all stayed within the letter of the law, but for a Member of Parliament it was extraordinary stuff.
If an IRA man comes to a Protestant home, and my men are there, they will kill that IRA man. Yes, sir.
And what if they found themselves in conflict with the British security forces?
Well, if the British security forces are going to join up with the IRA to kill Protestants, then we will be in conflict with them.
There's a clip in the archives of you saying around the, must be the third, fourth time, if my men saw an IRA man, they would kill him. But I mean, you wouldn't say that now, would you? Is that because you've mellowed or because circumstances have changed?
Well, I would like to know the circumstances in which that was said, but all I can say is that I wouldn't wish any man to go to hell. I'd like to see him saved and converted.
Ian Paisley's long-serving deputy, Peter Robinson, has no doubt that his party leader was right at the time to be prepared to meet force with force.
If you want to judge Ian Paisley on those kind of issues, judge him from somebody who is in his circumstances in that context. In circumstances where your country has been overrun, where violence is something that's happening on the menu every day of the week. And I suspect with a community that you represent, which is under attack, you will want to defend that community, and if you don't see that community being defended from the forces who should be defending it, then you start looking at what can I do to help these people in the circumstances which they are faced. And he will be criticised by people because of that. But the people who will not criticise him will be the people who day and daily had their back against the wall and were looking for somebody to stand up for them.
Hello there! Make it #1 for Ian Paisley. Hello there!
Increasingly, though, it's not just been the traditional supporters in little houses who vote for Paisley. Plenty of well-to-do Protestants support him too.
You're probably aware that at election times a large contingent of press and media will want to go along with Ian. He was in the upper Ban area and getting a great reception, and one reporter decided that this just couldn't be. He was in the grounds of a very large house, and he said to the lady, I'm looking around me here, and he says, you can't possibly mean that you're going to support Ian Paisley. And she took him round the back of her house, where there was a very vicious looking Rottweiler which was foaming at the mouth. She said, you see that dog? I hate that dog. It's noisy, it looks vicious. She says, but whenever I'm in the house, I feel safe with that dog about. She said, that's why I'm supporting Ian Paisley.
Stay to the right honourable gentleman. If this
Order. I'm sure that the honourable gentleman...
At Westminster, Ian Paisley is seen rather differently. He is respected as an outstanding parliamentarian. Former Speaker Betty Boothroyd.
I had a confrontation with him because one day I knew we were going to have a statement from the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, and I had a hunch, call it women's intuition if you want, I don't believe in it, but I had a hunch that he was going to be very difficult that day at question time. And I said to myself, fasten your safety belt, Betty, you're in for a bumpy ride today. And true to form, of course, I had to call Paisley, full house, absolutely chock-a-block, and he called the Secretary of State in his question a liar. Well, that was not allowed. That sort of term is not allowed in Parliament. I asked him to withdraw. He wouldn't do so.
And I stand by what I said. It was a falsehood. It was worse. It was a lie.
Order. In accordance with the power given me by Standing Order number 42, I have to order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the entire House for the remainder of this day's sitting.
I had no alternative but to dismiss him for 10 working days. He didn't have an argument with me. When that decision had been taken, he stood up, he walked to the door and he bowed to the chair, as he always did, because he had great courtesy. And some couple of weeks later, after midnight, I just left the chair and my attendant said, Dr. Paisley would like to see you. I was in a bit in trepidation. I thought, here's this big fellow going to tear a strip off me. I've nobody around, but I must see him before I put my head on the pillow tonight. Went into my library, big library, sat there, put all the chandeliers on and the silver shone, gave me a bit of Dutch courage. And this great figure opened the door and he came round with a smile on his face and he said, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the gracious way you threw me out the other day. He said, I got front page of the Belfast Telegraph and you got page 3. Well, we had to have a laugh. I've never been a page 3 girl before or since. But that was his attitude, and we always had the finest working relationship.
The big man.
The Tory MP Sir Nicholas Winterton is a parliamentary friend and admirer.
I instinctively liked the man. I like leadership, and by goodness, Ian Paisley provides it. I like courage, and my goodness, over the years, Ian Paisley has shown a massive courage. I like consistency, and again, Ian Paisley has shown that. And he hasn't compromised himself in respect of the dealings with terrorism.
Ian Paisley, of course, has never been in government, but he may not be far from it now. At St Andrews in Scotland last year, he agreed under certain conditions that he would share power with Sinn Fein, political wing of the IRA, saying yes after a lifetime saying no. David Trimble, one of the previous unionist leaders castigated by Ian Paisley for his readiness to share power in the past, has viewed the turnaround with a rather bitter amusement.
I do treasure the line in the minute of the rather stormy meeting he had after St Andrews in Lurgan, where he's reported in this minute of saying to the crowd, saying that it's in opposition you can say whatever you like, but it's different now. He was discovering that difference, so I do treasure that one.
It's hard to know how to interpret Ian Paisley's last years of public life. He railed against change without ever quite derailing it, but he opposed it with such brilliance that he emerged as the undisputed leader of unionism in the process. So how will the extraordinary gifts he honed denouncing Irish Republicans serve him if he ends up sharing power with them? I didn't come away from meeting Ian Paisley feeling I'd been given a clear answer to that question, but I did feel at least that I understood a little more about his attitude towards earthly power and authority.
You seem to me to be as much of a rebel as Gerry Adams is. I mean, in your own world, in Presbyterianism, in unionism, in Orangism in the early days, you created revolutions in all of those.
Well, that's very nice to know I'm a revolutionary. But all I can say is I have always sought to preach the truth as I've seen it, and then announce what I think in society has been wrong. I haven't always been right, but at least the motivation for it was not to cause trouble. The motivation was to show people where I thought they were wrong.
And so I say here in the heart of my constituency, thank you, the voters of North Antrim. And when I say that, I serve all the community. Doesn't matter where they hang their hat on Sunday, I serve them all. Thank you. God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen God.
When the cheers die away as people, applaud him and his leadership of Northern Ireland, you must wonder at times, sort of here I am saying that we must have a government which is acceptable to both communities. We must have civilised and friendly relationship with our neighbours to the south. These are the words that have earned him his present preeminence, but they are words that he wouldn't have uttered some years ago, and he must have doubts.
God save our Queen. The Queen. You've heard about moving speeches. That was a moving song. Thank you.
The Big Man was presented by Kevin Connolly and produced in Belfast by Rachel Hooper. Two Chelsea gold medalists have come up with totally different visions of how the new Gardener's Question Time garden in Harrogate should look. Bunny Guinness favours a sweeping serpent theme, while Chris Beardshaw would like to see bold geometric angularity. The stakes are high because whichever design prevails will define the garden for many years to come. Eavesdrop on the designers' duel in Gardener's Question Time in just a couple of minutes. After that, Claire Balding will travel to a windy and wild County Durham for this week's A Dog's Tale, the series about Britain's uncommon native dog breeds. In truly appalling weather on boggy moorland, she meets a handsome black and tan Gordon setter called Rigsby, and here's how his owner believes that hunter's laziness is to blame for the decline of the breed. Claire meets Rigsby and his owner Bob in this week's A Dog's Tale at 2:45. And later in this week's Open Book, Mariella Frostrop will talk to Tracy Chevalier about her new novel Burning Bright. That's Open Book at 4 o'clock.
BBC Radio 4, the news.